water rises up from the water table to create this island in the middle, which perhaps is why it's given the name the Osireion. We have much later evidence of activity here.
Behind the magnificent temple of Seti, the first at Abydos, deep in the sands of southern Egypt, lies a structure that has puzzled archaeologists for more than a century. Hidden beneath the surface and partially swallowed by the rising waters of the Nile floodplain, stands the Osireion, one of the most unusual and mysterious architectural remains ever discovered from ancient Egypt. Unlike the decorated temples and royal monuments that surround it, the Osireion appears almost like a monument from another age. Its massive granite pillars, enormous stone blocks, and strange underground design have raised questions that continue to challenge researchers even today. Before we uncover the secrets hidden within this ancient structure, make sure to subscribe to our channel and help us reach our goal of 5,000 subscribers. Because behind the walls of the Osireion lies a mystery that has survived for thousands of years, a mystery involving lost engineering techniques, forgotten builders, and a monument that may hold secrets far older than anyone expected. The structure was first uncovered in 1903 by the Swiss Egyptologist Edouard Neville, working under the auspices of the Egypt Exploration Fund. Earlier excavations between 1902 and 1903 involved Margaret Murray, under the supervision of the legendary archaeologist Flinders Petrie, and decades later, the site was reinvestigated in the 1920s by Henri Frankfort. But what these early researchers found was not what they expected to discover. Instead of a typical New Kingdom monument covered in inscriptions and royal imagery, they encountered a massive underground chamber built from enormous blocks of granite and sandstone, constructed with a style unlike almost anything else from the period. The Osireion was not built with ordinary stone. It was created from gigantic granite blocks weighing up to 100 tons each, fitted together without mortar. Its doorways rise more than 12 feet high, its walls are formed from carefully cut megalithic stones, and its central chamber contains enormous granite pillars supporting massive architrave blocks above them. Even more unusual is its location. The entire structure sits below the ancient water table and remains partially flooded today. The granite used in its construction came from quarries at Aswan, nearly 250 miles away, meaning these colossal stones had to be extracted, transported, and precisely positioned using engineering methods that remain a subject of debate. But the greatest mystery is not the size of the stones. It is the question of when the Osireion was actually built. The only direct evidence connecting the structure to a specific ruler comes from inscriptions bearing the names of Seti I and his successor, Merneptah. These inscriptions have traditionally been used to date the monument to the 19th dynasty. However, the early excavation records tell a far more complicated story. According to the observations of Edouard Neville, the walls that carried these inscriptions appeared to already exist before the texts were carved into them. Neville did not believe the Osireion was originally a 19th dynasty construction. In his 1914 publication, The Osireion at Abydos, he argued that the structure may have belonged to a much earlier period, possibly before the beginning of dynastic Egypt itself. Margaret Murray reached a similar conclusion in her 1904 research, noting that the architecture and construction methods did not resemble the known building practices of the New Kingdom. However, their interpretation was eventually rejected by the emerging archaeological consensus of the 1920s. Instead, scholars such as Henri Frankfort proposed that Seti I intentionally built the Osireion in an ancient-looking style as a symbolic monument, a cenotaph designed to connect the pharaoh with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. According to this interpretation, the strange design was not evidence of extreme antiquity, but rather a deliberate attempt to imitate the distant past. Yet, the debate never completely disappeared. For over a century, the Osireion's unusual characteristics remained recorded in archaeological studies. The enormous weight of its stones, the precision of its joints, the complete absence of mortar, and the stark simplicity of its design. These features seemed fundamentally different from the architecture normally associated with the 19th dynasty. While Seti I's nearby temple represents the height of New Kingdom craftsmanship, filled with elaborate reliefs, detailed inscriptions, and religious imagery, the Osireion stands in complete contrast. It is massive, silent, and almost completely undecorated. This contrast is what makes the structure so fascinating. The Temple of Seti I is clearly a monument of its time. Its construction is well documented, its purpose is understood, and its connection to the pharaoh is unquestioned. But behind that temple, hidden beneath the ground, lies something that appears to belong to a different architectural tradition. The question is not simply who decorated the Osireion. The question is, who created the foundation upon which those later inscriptions were placed? To understand why the Osireion remains such a controversial structure, it is necessary to understand the land where it stands. Abydos was not just another Egyptian city. For more than 3,000 years, it was one of the most sacred places in the entire civilization. Located approximately 300 miles south of Cairo, on the western bank of the Nile, Abydos became the spiritual center of the worship of Osiris, the god associated with death, resurrection, and the afterlife. Ancient Egyptians believed this was a place where the boundary between the world of the living and the realm of the dead became incredibly thin. The region contains some of Egypt's oldest royal burial grounds. At el-Ka'ab, archaeologists discovered tombs belonging to the earliest pharaohs of Egypt, dating back nearly 5,000 years. One of these tombs, belonging to the first dynasty ruler Jer, was later believed by Egyptians of the Middle Kingdom to be the actual resting place of Osiris himself. Because of this belief, Abydos became one of the most important pilgrimage destinations in ancient Egypt. Thousands of years later, Seti I chose this same sacred landscape to build one of the greatest temples of the New Kingdom. His temple at Abydos became famous for its extraordinary artwork and for the Abydos King List, a carefully carved record of previous Egyptian rulers that became one of the most valuable historical documents for understanding royal succession. The Temple of Seti I represents the achievements of the 19th dynasty at their peak. Its walls are covered with detailed reliefs, religious texts, and royal imagery. Its purpose is clear. Its construction belongs unmistakably to the reign of Seti I. But behind this magnificent temple, connected by a long underground passage, was another structure entirely: the Osireion. When Seti's temple was constructed, the Osireion was already buried beneath the ground. The entrance corridor leads downward from the temple complex into a hidden subterranean chamber positioned beneath the water table of the Nile floodplain. When Naval and his team entered the structure, they discovered a monument unlike anything they had expected. The Osireion is built primarily from enormous blocks of red granite and sandstone. At its center stands a hall containing 10 massive granite pillars arranged in 2 rows. These pillars support huge architrave stones that bridge the spaces above them, creating a structure designed for incredible weight and durability. The scale of these stones is almost impossible to ignore. The largest architrave blocks in the Osireion weigh approximately 100 tons. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, consider that most granite blocks used in the Great Pyramid weigh between 2 and 15 tons. Even the largest stones inside the king's chamber are estimated to weigh around 50 to 80 tons. The Osireion's massive architraves exist at the extreme upper limit of what ancient Egyptian engineering is known to have achieved. They represent a level of stone manipulation, transportation, and construction that continues to inspire questions about the capabilities of the people who built this mysterious underground monument. The granite used in the construction of the Osireion came from the quarries of Aswan, located approximately 250 miles upstream along the Nile. These enormous stones had to be extracted from the earth, transported across vast distances, and positioned into place with a level of precision that amazed early researchers like Naville and Murray. What made the achievement even more remarkable was the way the blocks were assembled. Unlike many later Egyptian structures, the Osireion was constructed without the use of mortar. The massive stones were cut and fitted so precisely that the joints between them were incredibly narrow, in some cases reportedly tight enough that a knife blade could not be inserted between the surfaces. The granite faces were carefully polished and finished, suggesting an enormous amount of time and effort dedicated to shaping the monument. Every detail of the construction gives the impression of a structure designed not merely to survive for generations, but to endure for eternity. It reflects an engineering ability that appears far more advanced than what is typically associated with the 19th dynasty. When Edouard Naville published his conclusions in 1914, he argued that the Osireion was far older than dynastic Egypt itself. His interpretation was based on several observations, beginning with the architecture. The style of the Osireion did not resemble the monuments of the New Kingdom. The 19th dynasty was an era known for elaborate temples, detailed hieroglyphic inscriptions, and magnificent relief carvings covering nearly every surface of royal architecture. The nearby Temple of Seti I at Abydos is one of the greatest examples of this tradition, with walls filled with religious scenes, royal records, and carefully planned decorative programs. The Osireion, however, appears completely different. Instead of elaborate decoration, it presents a design based on simplicity and scale. Its original construction contains almost no ornamentation. The enormous granite blocks stand bare and unadorned, creating an atmosphere that feels more like a monument from a forgotten age than a typical New Kingdom creation. The inscriptions that appear inside the Osireion also raised questions. The texts, including passages from the Book of Gates and other religious writings, appear to have been added after the original construction. They include the cartouches of Seti I and his successor Merneptah, creating the connection to the 19th dynasty. However, Naville argued that these inscriptions were not evidence of the monument's creation date, but rather later additions placed onto an already existing structure. To Naville, the evidence suggested that Seti I did not build the Osireion. Instead, he inherited an ancient monument and incorporated it into his own religious complex. One of the strongest comparisons Naville made was with another mysterious structure from Egypt's past, the Valley Temple of Khafra on the Giza Plateau. Located beside the Great Sphinx and connected to Khafra's pyramid complex by a causeway, the Valley Temple is one of the most impressive examples of ancient Egyptian megalithic architecture. It was constructed from enormous limestone blocks faced with red granite, assembled with extraordinary precision and without the heavy use of mortar. Inside, massive granite pillars support huge stone architraves, creating an architectural style that is remarkably similar to the Osireion. The similarities are difficult to ignore. Both structures rely on massive stone blocks. Both demonstrate extremely precise stone cutting and fitting. Both possess a stark, almost timeless appearance that contrasts sharply with the highly decorated architecture of later Egyptian periods. And both give the impression of belonging to a much older architectural tradition. The Valley Temple of Khafra is conventionally dated to the reign of Pharaoh Khafra, approximately 2558 BC to 2532 BC, more than 1,200 years before the reign of Seti I. If the Osireion truly belongs to the same architectural tradition, built using similar methods, and reflecting the same design philosophy, then its attribution to Seti I creates a difficult question. Why would a 19th dynasty ruler suddenly recreate a construction style that had seemingly disappeared for more than a millennium? Margaret Murray reached similar conclusions in her 1904 study of the structure. Through careful documentation and direct observation, she recorded the unusual features of the Osireion and noted that its construction techniques did not align with the known practices of New Kingdom builders. Murray later became one of the most respected figures in Egyptology and anthropology, continuing her academic work well into old age. Her research on the Osireion was detailed, methodical, and based on the physical evidence available to her. Like Neville, she did not believe the structure was originally created by Seti I. However, the interpretation of the Osireion changed dramatically during the 1920s. Henri Frankfort, a Dutch-born Egyptologist who became one of the most influential scholars of the ancient Near East, conducted further excavations at the site between 1925 and 1930 under the authority of the Egypt Exploration Society. In 1933, Frankfort published the Cenotaph of Seti I at Abydos, a work that established the explanation that would dominate mainstream Egyptology for the next century. Frankfort argued that Seti I intentionally built the Osireion in an ancient style. According to his interpretation, the structure was not an actual burial place, but a symbolic cenotaph, a monument designed to connect the pharaoh spiritually with Osiris, the god of death and resurrection. Seti I was not buried at Abydos. His actual tomb was located in the Valley of the Kings. The purpose of the Osireion, according to Frankfurt, was symbolic rather than practical. It represented a connection between the ruler and the mythological origins of Egyptian civilization. The unusual design, the massive stone blocks, the lack of decoration, and the water-filled central chamber were all intentional elements meant to create the feeling of extreme antiquity, a monument designed to resemble the legendary world of Osiris himself. This explanation has remained the accepted interpretation for nearly a century. But questions still remain. The first challenge concerns the inscriptions themselves. If Seti I built the Osireion, why do the inscriptions appear to be secondary additions? Why were they carved into surfaces that seem not to have been prepared for decoration? Why do they appear to have been placed onto an already completed structure, rather than integrated into the original design? In typical Egyptian construction, inscriptions were planned from the beginning. Walls were prepared specifically for carvings. Decorative programs were carefully incorporated into the architecture. The relationship between the structure and its inscriptions was intentional and unified. The Osireion appears different. Its inscriptions seem less like original design elements and more like markings added to an existing monument. The second challenge involves the construction technology itself. The 19th dynasty produced extraordinary architecture. The Temple of Seti I at Abydos demonstrates the incredible skill of New Kingdom builders. However, the methods used there differ dramatically from those seen in the Osireion. The temple relied on conventional New Kingdom techniques: smaller stone blocks, extensive decorative planning, mortar use, and surfaces designed from the beginning to receive elaborate carvings. The Osireion, however, follows a completely different approach. Its stones are far larger. Its joints are more precise. Mortar is absent. Its entire design philosophy is fundamentally different. If Seti I's builders were capable of creating structures in this ancient megalithic style, Why did they use it only once? Why does no other 19th dynasty monument display the same level of massive stone construction? The archaism argument requires accepting that New Kingdom builders possessed a unique ability that they rarely, if ever, demonstrated elsewhere, and then abandoned completely after a single project. The third mystery is the water. The central chamber of the Osireion lies below the water table. Today, the floor remains submerged, and the central island, traditionally identified as the symbolic bed of Osiris, where the god's body rested, rises from the surrounding water. The conventional explanation is that this flooding was intentional. According to this interpretation, Seti I designed the structure to represent the primordial waters of creation, the ancient waters from which, according to Egyptian mythology, the first land emerged. The water that fills the Osireion today may not represent the original conditions under which the structure was built. Over the past century, the water table in the region has risen significantly, especially after the construction of the high dam at Aswan during the 1960s. As a result, the flooding visible today may be far greater than what existed in ancient times. More importantly, the design of the Osireion does not appear to reflect a structure intended to remain permanently submerged. The massive granite blocks show evidence of long-term water exposure, but the overall engineering tells a different story. The extraordinary precision of the stonework, the carefully finished surfaces, and the enormous scale of the architraves suggest a monument designed to be experienced, observed, and used, not hidden beneath water. If the Osireion was built before the current water table levels existed, during a period when the Nile floodplain was lower and the groundwater was deeper, then the flooding may not have been part of the original design at all. Instead, it may be the result of environmental changes that occurred thousands of years after the monument was created. Such a possibility would support the idea of a much earlier origin. But the mystery of the Osireion does not end with the water. Another question emerges from the structure itself: its enormous scale. The Osireion appears to have been designed on proportions far larger than those required for ordinary human use. Its doorways are oversized. Its passages are wider than necessary. The dimensions of the central chamber create the impression of a space intended for occupants significantly larger than the average human beings known from documented Egyptian history. The height of the ceilings, the size of the granite pillars, and the sheer magnitude of the stone blocks all suggest a monument built according to a different understanding of scale. Early researchers noticed this unusual characteristic, but the observation has largely disappeared from mainstream discussions of the monument. And it raises a simple question. If Seti I constructed the Osireion as a cenotaph for his own symbolic burial, why would he create a structure whose proportions appear to dwarf his own body? Throughout Egyptian history, royal architecture was monumental, but it was still designed around human proportions. Temples could be enormous, but their entrances, corridors, and internal spaces were created for human movement and religious rituals performed by human participants. The relationship between architectural size and human scale remained consistent. The Osireion appears different. Its spaces are larger than necessary. Its dimensions suggest a design philosophy that does not perfectly align with the known architecture of the 19th dynasty. This question connects the Osireion to one of the most debated discussions in Egyptian archaeology: whether some monumental structures in Egypt may represent remnants of an earlier building tradition. One of the most controversial voices in this debate is Robert Schoch, a geologist at Boston University whose 1992 presentation to the Geological Society of America examined the weathering patterns of the Great Sphinx. Schoch argued that the vertical erosion patterns visible on the Sphinx enclosure walls were more consistent with prolonged rainfall erosion than with wind and sand erosion alone. According to his interpretation, the level of erosion would have required a much wetter climate, possibly dating back thousands of years before the traditional timeline of dynastic Egypt. If Schoch's interpretation is correct, it would suggest that the Sphinx predates dynastic civilization. Schoch later expanded his research to include other ancient structures, including the Osireion and the Valley Temple of Khafra. He argued that the similarities between these monuments point toward an earlier megalithic construction tradition, one belonging to a civilization capable of quarrying, transporting, and precisely positioning massive stones on a scale that later Egyptian builders inherited but did not consistently reproduce. The argument is not that dynastic Egyptians lacked engineering ability. The pyramids, temples, and tombs of ancient Egypt remain among the greatest achievements of human construction. The argument is that certain specific monuments display characteristics that may belong to a different architectural tradition, one that existed before the rise of dynastic Egypt and was later absorbed, adapted, and eventually forgotten. According to this interpretation, the Osireion may be one of those surviving examples. Other researchers have explored similar ideas from different perspectives. Robert Bouval, a Belgian Egyptian engineer, examined the relationship between Egyptian monuments, astronomical alignments, and ancient celestial symbolism. His work contributed to broader discussions about the origins and purpose of Egypt's sacred landscapes. Author Graham Hancock later brought many of these alternative ideas to a global audience through his books, introducing millions of readers to questions surrounding ancient chronology and lost civilizations. Mainstream Egyptologists have generally rejected these alternative interpretations. However, critics argue that rejecting the theories does not necessarily resolve the specific anomalies first documented by researchers more than a century ago. The stones remain enormous. The joints remain extraordinarily precise. The construction remains different from typical 19th dynasty methods. The inscriptions still appear to have been added after the original construction, and the proportions still create questions about the intended scale of the monument. Modern archaeologists, including David O'Connor of New York University, have greatly expanded our understanding of Abydos as a sacred landscape through extensive research into its early dynastic tombs, ceremonial structures, and religious significance. However, the exact chronological position of the Osireion remains one of the more debated questions surrounding the site. The structure remains exactly where it has stood for thousands of years, behind the Temple of Seti I, descending into the underground darkness, with massive granite pillars rising from the flooded floor of its central chamber. The names of Seti I and Merneptah are carved into its walls, but the walls existed before those inscriptions were placed there. The question is not whether the inscriptions are real. The question is how much older the structure beneath them might be. Ancient sources add another layer to the mystery. The Greek geographer Strabo, writing during the 1st century BC, described a monument at Abydos that appears to correspond with the Osireion. His account provides one of the earliest known references to the structure, showing that it was already recognized as an ancient monument more than 1,000 years after the reign of Seti I. Interestingly, Strabo did not identify it as a creation of Seti I. He described it as something ancient, something that already carried the weight of great age when he encountered it. Meanwhile, the water surrounding the Osireion continues to threaten its preservation. The completion of the high dam at Aswan in 1970 stabilized the annual flooding of the Nile, but it also contributed to rising groundwater levels throughout the Egyptian floodplain. Many archaeological sites that were once dry have become increasingly affected by water damage. The Osireion has suffered from this change. The flooding has made detailed examination more difficult, covering lower sections of the structure and preventing researchers from fully studying the evidence hidden beneath the water. The very parts of the monument that might answer the greatest questions are slowly becoming the hardest to access.